Hey everybody, Pastor Mark here, ready for some Bible time. And so if you have a Bible, you can turn to 2 Timothy chapter 1. That's where we're going to be. And if those of you that have been with us the last few weeks, we were in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5. Today we're going to be in 2 Timothy, the first chapter. I was just kind of curious or wondering, I wonder what text we should look at. I'm not sure if this is the perfect text, but it is one of the first that came to my mind when I thought about just walking through a section of Scripture and learning from God's Word today. So 2 Timothy chapter 1, let me give you an introductory thought. I am convinced that God plants in us, especially as followers of Jesus, a desire to impact and influence other people. Did you get that? I am convinced that God, especially in followers of Jesus, plants in us a desire to impact and influence other people. I have a daughter who's 18, I should know that. 19 years old and committed follower of Jesus, and pretty regularly in her interactions with friends, some of them Christians, some of them non-Christians. She wants to be helpful, right? Because God plants good things in us. And so when we see situations that are difficult, we're trying to help people get to a better place or help to get them to know God. I have a friend whose wife just passed away of cancer 2 or 3 days ago. And part of what's going on in my head is there a way that I can influence him to come to Jesus in the midst of this? Got it? Can you think of people in your life that you know right now, I would like to be used by God to influence them, to pull them in a godly direction, in a good direction? I'll bet most of us can think of a good friend, family member. Of course, I think of a lot of you folks in our church. I think of my children. I think of my neighbors, all those kind of things. So ready? That's the thought. How do we influence people with more power? That's our topic today. And we're going to learn from 2 Timothy chapter 1. The writer of 2 Timothy is Paul. And Paul is a phenomenal example of a person with influence. And I want to dissect these first verses that he writes to a young man named Timothy, who God has used Paul to influence Timothy greatly. And so part of it is, I wonder why, and I wonder how Paul has had so much influence into Timothy's life. So let me read with you the first 6 verses of this letter to Timothy. Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, in keeping with the promise of life that is in Christ Jesus. To Timothy, here we go, to Timothy, my dear son. So he's writing this letter, a personal letter to Timothy. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Lord, he says to Timothy. Verse 3, I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. Timothy, I added the Timothy part. Recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy, Timothy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, Timothy, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. Verse 6. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Now, we could probably continue to make observations throughout the first chapter, second chapter, third chapter of Paul and how he is approaching Timothy that I would say increases his authority and influence over Timothy's life. So that's what I want to explore with just these verses. What do these verses tell us about Paul that set the stage for this great influence over Timothy? All right? So what I have for you today from these verses is, I think it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 practical, super practical things that you and I can do to increase our influence with other people. Got it? So let me pray. Father, thank you for your word that teaches us. And as we make these observations today, I pray that there would be a supernatural empowerment of us, that you would see fit to shower on us an increased measure of authority and power to influence others, because we know you, Jesus, and we can surely be helpful to the people around us. I pray a blessing on everybody who's tuning in for this study this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. So 5 ways to increase influence. The first one, if you want to write some things down, we increase influence with deep affection. Deep affection. I noticed in verse 2 that Paul addresses Timothy as his dear son. He says in verse 2, to Timothy, my dear, if I'm underlining or circling something, my dear son. The word there for dear son is also translated beloved. We don't use that word a lot. My beloved, do you feel how special that means? No, my beloved son. I may have other sons or daughters or people that I care about, but you're my beloved son. It means deep affection. The word there is agape tos in the Greek. Beloved, loved, beloved, as beloved. Oh, look at this. As beloved beyond others. And so with this first idea is, if you want to influence someone, have influence in them, set them apart or make them feel special. See them as unique and special. You have probably heard this saying before, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You ever heard that one? Probably. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Paul had a deep affection, and Timothy was aware of it, that Paul saw him as special. In Philippians chapter 2:19, here's another thing that indicates Paul's heart towards Timothy. In Philippians 2, it says, I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. He's speaking to these Christians in Philippi. And in verse 20, Paul says about Timothy, I have no one else like him. I have no one else like him. If people feel that they are uniquely loved by you, set apart, and not just part of the crowd, they will listen to you. They will know that you have their best in mind. We're just basically talking about that principle and the power of loving someone. I was thinking of a few examples in my own life. There's a guy sitting in the room right now, Will Spear. He's right over here. Hey, Will. He's not really saying much. He just kind of waved with his phone. But I am finding and seeing in Will this uniqueness that separates him from other 20, how old are you, Will? 20. From other 20-year-olds I know. I'm just getting to know him, and part of what I'm doing is I'm building a framework for why I like Will and appreciate Will uniquely. Does that make sense? With people that I've tried to influence in the past and hope to have influence, my son Isaac, who of course I would love to influence, I want his best, I have found unique aspects of him that I appreciate. For Isaac, it's his integrity. For Pastor Steve Huffman, one of the things that keeps him uniquely beloved by me is his work ethic. He just serves people and serves people and serves people. For a non-Christian that I am trying to influence, his name's Charlie. And one of the things that I've done with Charlie is I've looked at him from a distance, and as we become closer friends, and I figure out what's that unique thing, that beloved thing that I appreciate about him. And for Charlie, it is his life experience. Now, just a side note, I'm not making this up. I'm just seeing things in people that create for me a deep affection and appreciation for them. So, pause and think about someone you'd like to influence. And here's a question. What unique element do I love about them? What is it about them that makes them special? And if you're hoping to have influence in them and yet will not take the time to consider some of these things, you have to go back to the drawing board of love. I think, oh gosh, I feel a tangent coming on. I think some people, oh, it's coming. I think for some people, this would be ungodly influence. They just want to have power over people. That's not what God calls us to do. God calls us to love people and influence, not so that I can exert my power, but influence to authentically help them. Boy, there's a difference there for you to consider. So if we want to increase influence, it has to do with a deep affection. Number 2, constant prayer. Constant prayer. I noticed in verse 3, I thank God whom I serve, as my forefathers did with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly, there's the word, constantly remember you in my prayers. You want to have influence over someone? Put them on your prayer list and intercede for them regularly. Some of you know the story of my wife and I and our discipline to pray for our children. As our children grew up early in their just formation, even before they were born, we began to pray every night for our kids. And so I was just doing some math. So for our children, basically our children have been prayed for every night since they were born up until they were about 18-ish. By the way, I still pray for my kids daily. But we were really diligent when they were growing up. And so I've done some math, and I think it'll come up on the screen. If I pray for my son, Isaac, every day until he is 18 years old, that's 6,570 prayers for my son. That's a lot of, and by the way, my prayers for my children were oftentimes included the same thing every time. I would pray for their spiritual development, their salvation, and I would pray for their spouse. There were some prayers that I prayed for them every day. That's knocking on the door of God on their behalf thousands of times if you're talking about kids. A couple of my kids are getting older now, and I still have a daily practice of praying for them. My guess is, no, I did some math. It's frightening. I did math. By the time they're age 27, I will be approaching 10,000 prayers for my daughter. By the way, I was thinking of this is not just for kids. A lot of you know Pastor Kathy at the church. Well, I have a practice of praying for for the staff at the church on a daily basis. I don't get that done every day, but a regular practice. And I was doing some math. Pastor Kathy's been on staff, and by the way, I also pray for some of our volunteer leaders really regularly. And for our church, I was thinking I've probably prayed for Pastor Kathy 3,000 times. Isn't that something? And just to make it real so that it's not all these big numbers, think of the person that you'd like to have influence over, like to move them toward God or get them out of a mess that they're in. If you pray for them daily for a month, that's 30 prayers for that person. And I wonder if in the midst of all that praying, when my children now, because I'm the old guy and a lot of them are kind of moving on, but they still will regularly call me and go, "Hey, Dad, what do you think about this?" And you know why I think they call me? Part of it is somewhere God saw fit to look down, and since I had loved and prayed for them so much, God bends their heart toward me to say, "I think I'll ask Dad," and maybe because they know that I'll pray for them. And my theory in this is that God, if you pray for someone, God then knows that you have a heart of love toward them, and He can entrust them under your influence. Let me say that again. If you will take somebody on in prayer, God then knows your heart for them and will release them more under your influence. Constant prayer. The person you want to influence, constant prayer. Number 3 that I see in Paul, because Paul was an influencer over people and especially over Timothy. Number 3 is joyful attention. If you want to write something down, joyful attention. This is the funnest one for me. I think I mentioned Charlie. Monday of this week, I kayaked up to Charlie's house. And Charlie came out of the front. He lives on a lake. That didn't make sense. I kayaked down the road to Charlie's house. No, I was visiting a lake, and he lives on a lake. So I kayaked up there. And when Charlie came out of the house, I'll just give you an example. I said, "Hey, Charlie," something like that, "my friend." And I approached him with a joyful hello. I tried to exhibit to him, "Man, I'm glad to see you. How have you been?" Does that make sense? Basically, I want to just fairly quickly underline the power of when you see someone, you are filled with joy to see them, that will help them want to be influenced by you. In verse 4, Paul says, "I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy." I think there's power in that. I can think of people in my own life who I willingly followed and listened to. A couple of people are coming to my mind right now. And I might even be out of balance in this. One of the reasons that I wanted them to speak into my life is because when I showed up, it felt like they were really glad that I showed up. It's like their affection for me, the joy that they showed when I showed up, just was a magnet to me. And it made me think, do you really like me? You must not know me because oh gosh, another tangent. This is the second one so far. How many of you know most of us kind of really struggle probably with self-confidence? I know I do. Gosh, I struggle with that. So when you see someone or they see you and they are genuinely, "I'm so happy to see you," who knows what that will do to open their heart to your influence in their life. Now, like for me, that means probably I'm gonna be joyful in my vocal approach, like "Hey," or do something goofy like that. But joyful approach does not have to look the same for all of us. The important thing is that they're perceiving and that our heart is glad to have them there. This could happen through some of you just through sincerity. I'm glad to see you. You could relate or draw them toward you because you're just a faithful encourager. One friend of mine, he's kind of a newer friend. His name's Phil. And I think I used him as an example once in a message on the weekend. He is the high five king of my circle. Man, he high fives people, and I watch people get drawn to him, especially younger folks. And I think some of it is because he just is a high fiver. He approaches situations with joy. So number 3 was joyful attention. How you doing at that? I could probably dig into that a little bit. When's the last time you smiled with people? That's probably worth tuning in tonight. Hey, Christians, where's the smile? All right, we've got 2 more things to think about. If you want to increase your influence, godly vision. Godly vision. Now, this may be a major shift. You have to be careful how you say that. Shift for some of us, because I'm just telling you, here's one of the challenges of living in this world. Sometimes we prioritize the world's voice over God's voice. We think vision for someone's life has primarily to do with what kind of profession you're going to have. Are you going to save enough money to enjoy shiny things? Are you going to have enough money so that you can retire at some point when you get older? That may not be godly vision. That just may be worldly vision. Worldly vision could be, oh, hey, my vision for your life is I can't wait till you get married, right? I'm hoping for you that you'll get married, and then you'll get this position, and all of life will work out great. Well, that may not be godly vision. Godly vision is deeper than just, I hope that your dreams come true. In verse 6, Paul says, for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God. Say it, God, the gift of God. In other words, if I want to influence someone, and this is a great question, am I willing to prioritize God's will for their life and interject God's will for their life, even if they don't yet see it? Let me tell you how this works. I had a friend years and years ago whose original growing up dream was he wanted to be an animator for Disney. He's incredibly gifted at drawing, all right? And as a spiritual son of mine, I knew him before he became a Christian, I knew when he became a Christian, and I knew him after he became a Christian. And part of my responsibility as an influencer of his life was, I remember still having the conversation and saying to him, I know you've always wanted to work for Disney in animation. Let me ask you this. Is that your dream for you, or is that God's dream for you? And I still remember him thinking, well, this is what I thought. He said, well, of course, that's what I've always wanted to do, and I want to be. And then he began to pause, and we entered into a dialogue where he revisited some of his dreams and made sure, no, that's not the right way to say it. He submitted his dream and asked God, God, you give me your dream for my life. Got it? If you want to be a spiritual parent, have influence over others, we have got to think deeper than just, well, what do you want to do when you grow up, Joe? Paul said, to fan in the flame the gift of God. If you want to write a word out, if you've never explored it next to this point, write down redemptive purpose. Redemptive purpose. And a redemptive purpose goes beyond just my dream for my life, but a redemptive purpose would be, what did God plant in you in order to help be on the mission of redeeming the world? Got it? If you want to have influence over other people, look deeper than just what did they like to do. Try to get into what God would have them do. Oh, I just had a thought of who was this? Oh, a guy who owns a bar that I've only met twice. But I watched the way this guy operates, and he's probably, if we were just to look into his life, he's not very functional. He is pretty sure an alcoholic, although he would never admit it. Morally, he's kind of bankrupt. But you know what I watch him do? Just in my little glimpse into his life, he is always serving and helping people that are in trouble. He's like, somebody will come into the bar. I wonder how many bartenders that are really good at what they're doing really should be pastors. Because sheep come in with pain and discomfort, and they try to provide for them help and clarity, and they're counselors and all that stuff. It could be that although they will die without Christ, if they don't know Christ, they're not pastors. Don't be confused. That person's not a pastor of a bar. But we can identify that they have pastoral or shepherding gifts, that their redemptive purpose would be, how about you take those things that God's put in you and come over here, and instead of leading people to the best drink or the best little thing here that makes them feel better, how about you give your gifts to the kingdom purpose that God's created for you? So you can just explore that redemptive purpose. So that was godly vision, and we've just got one more. The last thing is prayerful touch. Prayerful touch. Verse 6. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Through the laying on of my hands. Jesus, you guys, Jesus, we know this. He physically came in contact with lots and lots and lots of people. It was part of his approach to the miraculous and healing ministries, the healing ministry that he had. He would lay his hands on them to pray for them. He would use the power that was, well, let me go to this. In Luke 8:46, and I'd encourage you to read this story. There's a woman who has, it's the Bible in most translations say, an issue of blood. So she had a menstrual problem where she would not ever stop menstruating. And so that would be a horrible situation. It went on for years and years and years. Well, she sneaks through the crowd. Some of you know this story. She sneaks through the crowd and she just makes contact with Jesus. And because of the power that was in Jesus, it immediately heals what doctors have been trying to heal for like a dozen years. And in Luke 8:46, this is what Jesus says. He says, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. If you have a Bible there, if you're using your online stuff, will you highlight power has gone out from me? And I want to transition that to you and I. Listen, Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus and submitted to the Holy Spirit, there is a measure of power that is resident in us. God who raised Jesus from the dead, right? He's in us. And what I'm challenging you to do in this last point is strategically use that power that is within you to make contact with other people. I don't want to underestimate the value and power that is resident within a believer, and the fact that God may use that contact to take some of the power that's in you and make a difference in another person. Couple ideas to finish. The first time I ever began to explore this was when I got to ride in a car and have a conversation with the lead pastor of a large church. His name was Greg. And I was 22 years old and a dweeb. Just a dweeb. I don't think I was on staff any, I wasn't yet moving into my ministry stuff. I was a dweeb. That's not true. How do I say this? I was going to say I was just a newborn Christian, kind of dweeby. Growing up as a toddler. And I still remember the day I met this guy named Greg, and he reached out and he shook my hand. And he said, "Hi," something like, "Hi, Mark, my name is Greg, and it's good to meet you." And he shook my hand. And I cannot tell you what happened, but I still remember thinking of that moment. And I think, it's a theory, I think when I shook his hand, something came from him into me that actually helped lay a foundation for me to move forward in ministry. And you think, oh, come on, Mark, did he have like a magic touch? And I just want to say, I think maybe God used his handshake with me to impart something with me. And there is biblical precedence for this kind of a thing, because Jesus would touch people and then they would be healed. So let me finish up with this practical thing, 2 ways you might increase your influence with other people just through physical touch. There are 2 things. And the first thing, and if you want to write it down, you can. One is through strategic moments. Through a strategic moment. That's when I ask someone, like Will, who's with me. I don't know if I've ever done this with Will, technical, whether there are times I will say, "Hi, I'm thinking about this. We've been in a conversation. Can I lay my hand on your shoulder and pray?" It's a strategic moment. That's what happened when Paul imparted the gift to Timothy through the laying on of his hands. That was likely a strategic moment because there was Paul and elders, and I doubt that they snuck up and secretly put their hand on Timothy. They invited him and said, we're going to lay hands on you, son, right? So there are times that you can use a strategic moment, and the other one is what I call a sneak attack. And some of you have heard me talk about this before. And that is, in my spirit, when I'm shaking someone's hand, I am in my mind thinking, God, if there's any virtue in me that can flow out from me into this person, let it be so. There are other times that I will see somebody. I've done this with Meyer guest services people when you walk in, and they'll be like, "Hi, welcome to Meyer." Now, I haven't been laying my hand on their shoulder during this COVID-19 thing. But if there's an appropriate way to do it, as I'm walking by, I might pat them on the back and say, "Thanks for being nice." Right? Does that make sense? I do small, little points of contact, knowing, not with some arrogance, but knowing that somewhere in me is the same power that raised Christ from the dead. And I am willing for God to take part of that, release that, to have influence over other people in a positive way. Prayerful touch. So if we can revisit these things, right? This stuff will work, you guys. If you want to increase your influence, have deep affection, constant prayer. Think of the people that we want to influence. Joyful attention. Smile when they show up. Godly vision. You can think of that idea of redemptive purpose. And prayerful touch. That'll give you some things to think about from 2 Timothy chapter 1. Great to be with you guys. Hope to see you soon. Can't wait till we start to see each other more in person. I have hope that that's coming soon. Have a great day, you guys.